Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Mega games that both started, interestingly enough, right around the same time, both finished within minutes of each other. Again, I happen to be on Fox Sports Radio. For people who don't know, I host the National Recap Show every Saturday night. And so I was on air as Oregon Penn State comes down to the wire in double overtime, and Alabama gets the victory in Athens, Georgia. So let's go ahead and start there. And let's start with, what I think, I'll be honest, is just a sort of shocking result, not just because Alabama won, but in the manner that it happened. Final score, Alabama 24, Georgia 21. Alabama picks up what I would deem the single biggest win of the Kalen DeBoer era. And I think conversely, it's time to officially have the conversation. Georgia, you got yourself a Bama problem. It is official, as Alabama now 8-1 against Georgia in the Kirby Smart era. Of course, conversely, Georgia is 1-8. So listen, we'll talk about the Georgia perspective in a minute, but to the victor go the spoils. And let's go ahead and start with Alabama. And listen, to me, listen, let me just put all my cards on the table, okay? I could sit here and lie. I could sit here and pretend that, maybe, there was a scenario where I could. No. Listen, if you listen to any of my shows, any of my platforms, if you follow me on any social media, I picked Georgia to win. And I'll tell you this, there's a tweet in my drafts where I basically was going to say, I think Georgia wins convincingly. I'm glad it's in the drafts, but Bama fans, let's be honest. I just think there were so many questions about this team going into this game. And I think conversely, there were two ways that you could look at the Alabama situation. You could sit there and say, 4 losses over the last 2 years against unranked teams. That obviously doesn't apply to Georgia. But more importantly, 4 losses away from Tuscaloosa. I believe the stat was Kalen DeBoer 2-5 in games away from Tuscaloosa. Georgia, of course, conversely, with a 33-game win streak, and where 33-game home win streak, excuse me. And really where I stood on the Bama situation was this. It's great that you figured some stuff out against UL Monroe. It's great that you figured some stuff out against Wisconsin. But to me, it meant very little. And I don't want to say the whole season was going to be defined by what you look like against Georgia, but I think the whole season was in many ways going to be defined by what you look like against Georgia. It wasn't even about winning. It was about, can you go on the road? Will you be competitive for 4 quarters? If you get punched, will you punch back? And so I got to give Bama all the credit in the world, because I saw a lot of different scenarios in this coming into this game. Now, I saw the scenario where Georgia won, but the one scenario that I didn't see was Alabama basically dominating this thing from start to finish. Listen, I don't think just based on the stats of it all, you could sit there and say that Alabama absolutely dominated. I don't think you could sit there based on the box score, based on the final score of 24-21, and say that Alabama dominated. And I don't know that you can sit there and say that Georgia didn't have chances, and we're certainly, but here's the thing. When I look back at that game, Bama set the tone early and never let their foot off the gas. And as important as the win was, it was the manner in which they did it. This team, which has kind of ebbed and flowed, peaked and valleyed over the last, whatever it is now, let's see, 13, 17 games of the Kalen DeBoer era, they came out, they dictated things. And I think as importantly, every time they punched and Georgia punched back, Alabama had the counterpunch. I mean, I think to me, this is going to sound weird because you could probably point to 2, 3, 4 defining plays in the game. I think Georgia not going for it on 4th down, we'll get to that in a minute, was certainly one of them. But I think conversely, the play to me that defined this game, you know what it was? It was that Caden Proctor, it was technically a lateral, so I think it was technically counted as a carry, but it was obviously a pass from Ty Simpson to Caden Proctor. And I just think that set the tone. We're not going to be bullied. We're not going to be intimidated after Florida State put us on our heels and we never really kind of got back, never got our legs back. It was the exact opposite where I think they put Georgia on their heels early and never really let up from there. And so when I look at this game, a couple things stand out. First of all, you can see the stats on the screen. Let's go ahead and give Ty Simpson some credit, man, because Ty Simpson, America was not familiar with your game, my man. Okay, so obviously, Alabama fans, if you don't know the meme, there's a famous Shaq meme where he says, I was not familiar with your game. Well, I bring it up because with Alabama, with Ty Simpson, listen, I think if you had been paying close attention, you knew how good this kid has been over the last couple games. And you know, by the way, going back to Florida State, that it wasn't really his fault that Alabama's offense struggled against Florida State. I blame that on Ryan Grubb. I blame it some on the offensive line. Whatever, Florida State is in the rearview mirror. I bring it up solely to say that when I look at Alabama, when I look at Ty Simpson, again, another guy, he had been good against UL Monroe and Wisconsin, a combined 41 of 46, but could he do it on the biggest stages? And the answer is unquestionably yes. Finishes the game. This is Ty Simpson, the Alabama quarterback, 24 of 38, 2 passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown. And I'll say this, I hate doing the Heisman stuff in September and October. I think it's an award that's really defined by mid to late November. What are you doing? What is your team doing late in the year? But you start talking about Heisman candidates right now, Heisman favorites. Ty Simpson's got to be at the top of the list because he's not only playing well, but here is the other thing that really stood out to me about Ty Simpson is I think he's taking on a leadership role and a leadership role in that locker room that is, I can't say desperately needed because you just beat Georgia, but I think it's a very nice thing. And it's funny because we go back to earlier in the week. Remember Tuesday's show, we did reaction to that big Kalen DeBoer sit down with Alex Scarborough. And Kalen DeBoer said all the right things about I'm here to motivate my guys, and I've had to change my tone, and I've yelled and screamed and maybe dropped a few more 4-letter words than I normally do. But conversely, when I look at that situation, I sat there and said, you know, part of the problem is I don't know if guys in that locker room are stepping up as vocal leaders. Now, guys can be great in workouts, great in the facility, great in whatever, great in the community. But when push comes to shove, who is in that huddle screaming at dudes? We all remember, you know, AJ McCarron and what was it, Barrett Jones a million years ago, screaming at each other in the midst of a national championship game, like holding themselves to a higher standard. And I just hadn't seen that from Bama through however many games against 17 the Kalen DeBoer era. Well, go back to Saturday night. There was a clip. I want to say it was maybe after Alabama even scored their first touchdown, where Ty Simpson walks to the sideline and just is in somebody's face and basically was saying to the defense, like, shut them down. We're doing our part. You do yours. And it may sound like a negative, but I'm not trying to say it as a negative. I'm trying to say it as an incredible positive of like, man, oh man, oh man. He was just letting people know this is the new standard. And I can't say how much I am impressed by him. Conversely, I'll say this. This was the biggest win of the Kalen DeBoer era, okay? And I was thinking about this, a couple things. One, first of all, just have to give him credit because, listen, he's a highly compensated guy. You're not going to excuse the 9-4 last year. You're not going to excuse the Florida State game. But I think in hindsight, we can kind of sit there and say, okay, a couple things about Florida State. One, week 1, Florida State, entirely new coaching staff, entirely new roster. You're on the road. Gus Malzahn, it's tough to prepare for that, and Alabama fans know that better than anybody. 2, I think we also have to acknowledge there were some injuries that we probably didn't acknowledge enough at the time. Tim Keenan, one of their best interior defensive linemen, was out. By the way, he was all over the field on Saturday when I was watching that game. And so you have the Florida State game, but none of it matters if you don't go out and have the performance that you did against Georgia. And I was thinking about this in the lead up to the game. Listen, there's a scenario where if you're Alabama and you lose that game, you can still take some positives about it. But can you imagine what this show would be like? What every media outlet in America would be like if Alabama had gone to Georgia and it was like 24-3, 31-13, whatever. And so Kalen DeBoer, I got to give him a ton of credit because I think this was the most important win of the Kalen DeBoer era. And this is going to sound crazy. This to me, this could sound crazy. because I know Alabama has won 6 national championships since whatever it is, 2009 or so. I think this is a program-defining win for Kalen DeBoer and a program-defining win for Alabama. It sounds crazy, national championships, I get it. But I even go back to last year. Yes, Alabama had a couple nice wins. Let me ask you a question, though. And you can tell me that I'm crazy and that I'm wrong and I don't know what I'm talking about. I go back to last year, even that Georgia win. That kind of felt like an extension of the Nick Saban era. And I don't want to dismiss what Kalen DeBoer did, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, it was like, Alabama enters that game 3-0. Nick Saban had kind of dominated Kirby. The game's in Tuscaloosa. It's mostly Nick Saban players headlined by Jalen Milroe. And it just felt like an extension of the Nick Saban era. It was just, I remember tweeting that day like, oh, I guess Alabama just has another great coach for another 30 years. Deal with it, everybody else. And then he had to go through adversity. He had to go through some lumps last season. And so for him to come out on the other side after 4 losses last year, after the season opening loss, I just think it's an unbelievable credit to him and just an unbelievable win for the Alabama Crimson Tide. And I think it's the biggest win of his era. And I think it's a program-defining win because now you could say, we did it on the road. There's nothing fluky about it. We had struggled away from Tuscaloosa. No more. Lastly, let me say this. I want to go back to Ty Simpson for half a second because, again, to me, it's about winning a game, but it's about an attitude and mindset going forward. Again, and again, I don't mean to keep going back to last year, but the context matters. And you go back to last year, and there were highs and there were lows and there were peaks and there were valleys, and when you won, it felt good, but it just never seemed to fully click. And I even go back to the Florida State game. And so to bring it full circle, and I'm not trying to make this about Florida State, but I remember after the Florida State game, we discussed a quote at the time from Ty Simpson. Ty Simpson, after Florida State, basically said like, yeah, we kind of took him for granted and we weren't ready to play. And I was like, God, this is the same thing as last year. Like, what the heck is going on? How can you have that attitude for you? He's been telling us for 8 months that things are going to be different. Now you're telling me that you overlooked Florida State in week 1? No excuses. The old Wedding Crashers line, no excuses, play like a champion. And so I bring it up because Ty Simpson said something very interesting after the game that I do want to share with you really quickly. A couple things. Make sure you're following our Torres on Bama page. Torres on Bama, all your late-breaking Alabama news if you are an Alabama fan. With that said, Ty Simpson, after the game, here is his reaction to the win at Georgia. I believe Charlie Potter is the reporter who shared this clip on social media. Matt, play this out.
I just think, right, we had a chip on our shoulder. We know that we didn't play up to our standards the week 1. We just came back as a team, right, and we were like, all right, what are we going to do now? You know what I mean? Like, that's over. Do we want to be, known as the team who, doesn't finish, doesn't, sustain competitive stamina, right? Or we're going to play with our chip on our shoulder and, we said it all week, right? Us against the world. Like, us, when we walked in that, in Athens, right, between the hedges, it was us against a, bunch of Georgia fans, right? And that's the kind of mentality that we have to have throughout the season, right? It's Alabama against everybody.
That was Ty Simpson talking after the game, again, via Charlie Potter, who covers Alabama. I loved it. And I thought it was an important statement, again, in light of what he said. And it's not his fault. I'm not blaming him. But after Florida State, we overlooked him, we this and that. But what I loved about it was Bama against the world, but also what do we want to be defined by as a team? And again, to me, this is so much bigger than just a win at Georgia, because ultimately why this is so important, why this matters, is because I believe that this truly is a turning point for this program going forward. Listen, you can talk a big talk when you beat UL Monroe, when you beat Wisconsin, when you beat whoever about, yeah, things are different now and we're da-da-da-da, this and that. But when push comes to shove, when you're punched in the mouth, when you're on the road, when you're under the fire, can you really step up and respond time and time and time again? Nobody wins every game, but can you do it over and over again? And not only that, but is that your mindset going into games and when things, when crap hits the fan during games? And I think, there have been times, I would say, over the first 16 games of the Kalen DeBoer era where I have felt like Alabama players have said things because they think it's the right thing to say rather than actually believing it. Well, darn it, for the first time in the Kalen DeBoer era. I absolutely believe it. I think this program has turned a corner. Now, I'll say this. You go back to me last year after the Alabama-Georgia game, I would have said something similar, but you got a chance to prove it because what I will say, you do have Vanderbilt next week, and Vanderbilt is all of a sudden, one, a very good team, and two, we obviously have seen the recent history of Bama beating Georgia and then not coming out ready to play. But maybe I'm a sucker. Maybe I'm being caught up in the moment. But I really genuinely do feel like this is different for Alabama and that this is a different team and a different program and a different mindset going forward. Credit to Alabama for getting the win over Georgia.